All right, so it's not showing up on my phone yet. If there's anyone out there and they can see and hear us. It's not showing up on it is showing up. Never mind. Yet. If there's anyone out there and all right. They can see yeah, that's probably going to echo horribly, so I better turn that down. All right. So welcome everyone. I'm here with Mark Allan Gunnells, and Mark, would you care to introduce yourself quickly?
My name is Mark Allan Gunnells. You got that right. I'm a writer who's been working in the small press for over 10 years, and every time I have a new book out, I start the whole pimping thing, and so I'm here to pimp.
Yeah. So how many books have you? And I'm okay. Let me split this question up. How many novels have you written, and how many collections of short stories do you have in print?
That's a hard question. I mean, it shouldn't be a hard question, but oddly enough, somebody just asked me that yesterday, and if I can find the file I sent him, I could tell you. But I've published over 20 books total, at least. I think I figured out I have 11 short story collections, and then the rest are novels and novellas. But at least over 20.
Wow. And how long has it been since your first publication, like your first collection or short story?
The first book I ever published
novel.
The first book I ever published was in 2009. And it was a 3-story chapbook from Sideshow Press, which doesn't exist anymore. But I published that in 2009 and followed it up the next year with my novella Asylum, which Apex Publishing put out. So it's been, since 2009. I started publishing short stories in little magazines and e-zines back in 2005, I think it was, and then my first book was 2009.
That was back in the time when you actually had to use the postal service to submit stories.
Yeah, the young people don't know that struggle, but I remember having to send out the story with the self-addressed stamped envelope because they made you pay to get your own rejection.
Yeah, that's very true, and that got kind of costly, especially if you're like fishing for an agent or something, and you're sending them all over the place.
Yeah, and I used to get the big writer's market book and look at all the magazines and go from there.
Oh yeah. So you have a new novel or novella coming out, and it's called To Be, and it comes out on February the 13th of this year, 2021, which is as of this recording, it's only a week away. So when you first talked to me about this novel, you mentioned that it had been in your head for 20 years before you finished writing it. So I was wondering what was the very beginning of this novel? How did this story idea come to you?
Well, I mean, I guess in a weird way, it sort of started when I was in college. I had an idea for a short story that I wrote that incorporated the idea that became the novel's ending. But I didn't like the short story. I thought it didn't do justice to that idea. And then about 20 years ago, I was living in an apartment, and I had come home late at night after dark. And in the breezeway of the apartment complex, the overhead light was flickering, and it was such a quintessential horror movie kind of feel to it. And I got to thinking about how much I love ghost stories and haunted house stories, and I thought, nobody ever does a haunted apartment story. And then it almost clicked in my head when I thought that. I thought I could use the idea for that short story as the ending of the story of the novel, and it almost came fully formed to me just in the breezeway of that apartment complex. Um, it just took me a while to get to writing it.
Was there any reason why it took you so long to get to it?
Um, I think I wasn't ready yet. I think as a not just as a writer, but just as a person, because this novel deals with some pretty dark and painful material, and I don't think I had enough life experience yet to really delve into it the way it needed to. I did make an attempt about 10 years ago. I wrote like a chapter and a half. But again, I wasn't happy with it. I didn't feel I was so in love with the idea. I'm like, I knew this wasn't doing it justice. And again, I just don't think I was ready. I think I needed a little bit more time to mature as a person so I could really explore those themes the way they deserve to be. And when I did finally write it, I didn't use any of that chapter and a half that I had tried 10 years ago. I just started fresh and just tunneled in from there.
The fact that this novel, um, uh, you didn't feel confident enough to write it for 20 years, makes me wonder, are there many other novels that you're just itching to get at, but you're just not quite ready yet?
Well, oddly enough, the novel I'm writing now, which I'm almost finished with, is an idea I had back in college. Um, and I think it was because I finally got to write to be, which had been just rattling around in my brain for so long. And it felt so good to finally like have this thing that I'd lived with all this time be a tangible, finished product, that I got to thinking about triangle, this idea I had back in college. And I decided, well, let me just continue this trend and finally make this one a reality. The one I'm writing now, I had kind of thought at some point I might never write it, to the point that an earlier novel I have sequel, I worked the idea into it as a movie someone was making. So people who read that novel might recognize the novel I'm writing now as just that little bit in that book.
Well, um, how does it feel to have it written? And like, is there a sense of at least release? You know, because you're done, and it was like this book kind of haunted you for some time, if you know, a good portion of your life.
It did, pardon the pun, but and it does feel great. It feels like when I finally sat down to write it, it really just poured out. Like it took me 2 months. There were no hitches, there were no stalls, there were no. I didn't get bogged down with any doubts or worries. Like I really just tunneled in. So my joke is that it only took 2 months to write, 20 years and 2 months. But yeah, because I loved the idea so much, which had started to make me scared to write it. But I ended up loving the experience and loving the finished work. So it feels pretty good.
Awesome. Now, can you give us a brief description of what? I'm not too sure exactly how far you want to go into the plot, because while I was reading it, certain things you release certain information just to like at the right time for you to keep the reader not only interested but fascinated as to what's going on in the story.
Yeah. Well, there are definitely hopefully some surprises for people in the book. So I won't get too far, but the basic premise is a young man who was in a, unhealthy, toxic relationship, tries to get out of it, and his ex shows up at his apartment with the intention um, to kill the main character and then kill himself. Well, he only actually succeeds in killing himself, the main character survives. But he begins to suspect that his ex, death isn't enough to keep him from coming after him. So he thinks that his ex is now haunting his apartment, haunting him, and still trying to kill him.
And it's as you suggest with that synopsis, there's some very dark areas that you cover, or that the story at least covers. Things that we see almost every day in the news, which is it's unfortunate, but it's there. Things like murder, suicide, tub scene that you described. That's going to stick with me sometime, and I have you to thank for that. So I have heard about that bathroom scene though. Was that difficult to write?
Um, it wasn't difficult to write in the sense that it came very quickly, like a lot of this novel. Like I just got it going and it just went. But obviously the subject matter of it is very intense and very painful. So I definitely was trying to tap into those emotions when I was writing that scene. It might sound weird, but no matter how dark what I'm writing is, I'm also always having fun. Like the darkest scene I write, I'm still having fun because I'm in the thick of the creative act. But yeah, it was definitely, painful to tap into those emotions to really do it justice, because I hope that I do it justice and that it does have a powerful effect on the reader.
Like I said, that's going to stick with me for some time. 'Cause you put the reader right into Burke. That's the main character's name. You put us right in his, and I couldn't help but feel bad for the book he was reading.
Yeah, well, it doesn't fare too well, but but it's a horror book. Everybody is a
yeah. That reminds me, because the book he's writing is a Nick Cutter book. There's quite a few horror book references in here. Was that conscious? Did you do that consciously, or did it just kind of like, hey, all these neat little horror?
Well, I'm a huge horror nerd. I'm just a big horror geek. So my love of the genre and love of certain writers, it's always going to crop up in my work just because that's who I am. And I like doing that. And there's one horror novel he's reading in the book that's not real, but it's a horror novel written by the main character of my earlier book, 324 Abercorn, because the main character of that novel was a horror writer. So I also have fun doing those little connections that way.
Yeah. Do you have like a shared universe within your books?
I do make a lot of these connections, so technically I guess I do. They're not usually that prominent, except for a few cases where I've written direct sequels. But one time I think I made a Facebook post where I was sort of detailing all the little dots that you could sort of connect the dots between the books. And like sometimes they're very small, just like this one random reference to the book that was written by the character from a previous book. And in that book, he meets someone who was a character in another book. And so in that way, I mean, yeah, they pretty much are. The only ones that probably aren't connected are my end of the world zombie books, because no one's, it's the end of the world in those.
Speaking of one of your end of the world zombie books, I got this when the publisher announced that they were no longer going to be selling the print version, and so I hopped on board and I got that. so that a print copy. That's Asylum. When did you write this, by the way?
God, I probably wrote that in.
The date is 2010.
Yeah, that was the publication date. I probably wrote it about 3 years before that. Took me a while to find a publisher for that one for various reasons, but Apex really did a good job with that one. That's actually like the second edition. The first edition had a different cover and everything, and that edition was a re-release with a new short story set in that universe in it. And I mean, they kept it in print for 10 years, and it's done pretty well by me. It was the second book I ever published, and in some ways, I feel like it's maybe one of the ones I'm most known for. So that book's done right by me.
Mhm. Awesome. Now, getting back to 2B, I found the characters very interesting because of how realistic they felt to me. If they're bad, like 'cause there is a villain in this story, but there's a reason why he is the way he is. It sort of gives the opportunity for the reader to, if not sympathize with the villain, at least understand why he is the way he is. And in a lot of fiction, the bad guy's just he's a jerk. Uh, of course. Um, so you can't help but root for the main character. Oh yeah, the main character, Berkeley. He's not exactly the most cool guy in the world, but you kind of understand why he's like that because of how the novel opens up. He almost died, right? So I'm wondering how you approach, especially with this book. How did you approach the characters? Did they take a light, or did you plan for it to be this way?
Um, I mean, I had the bare bones of the idea. Like I said, when I first got the idea 20 years ago, I pretty much had the shape of it. I definitely knew the beginning, and I definitely knew the end. Um, the characters, however, that I wrote with this book, they probably wouldn't have been the characters I wrote if I had written it 20 years ago. And I think it's to the better that I waited so long. But the way I write is I kind of start, I know some basic information about the characters, but I don't really like plot them out. I sort of get them moving and let their personalities develop as I'm writing. And then that actually helps inform the direction of the story because once I firmly know their personalities, I know what they would or wouldn't do in given situations. Um, but I particularly enjoyed writing these characters because to me, reading and writing are exercises in empathy. And you need to understand the characters, even the characters who aren't doing good things, even the characters who aren't totally likable. And I particularly liked working with Berkeley because in a way, with this book, I was dealing with the idea of trauma and how trauma affects us and how we react to trauma. And it's not, I feel like sometimes when people have gone through a traumatic
Mhm.
event, the people around them, while they sympathize, they get to a point where they're just ready for you to get over it, or they're ready for you to snap back to who you were beforehand. And so I was dealing with that with some of the side characters and just dealing with, like with Berkeley, it's not that he doesn't want to be who he was before, but he feels like he can't be because of what's happened to him. And I liked playing with that. And even though not all the characters were likable all the time, I loved all of them. And I felt there was an authenticity to them that I hope that the reader can appreciate.
Yeah, for sure. They felt like people that I know, and you feel when you're reading the book, you feel yourself kind of judging them as
Yeah.
people, but then you're like, oh yeah, but they've been through this, so it makes sense this way, and so yeah, I really liked that aspect of the book. It was I'd say my favorite, the characters. I really liked all of them because they all had their own personality and did their own their own. I also liked how diverse the characters were in 2B, because you have the main character is gay, his boss at his job is non-binary, and uh, that kind of coming into fiction these days when 10 years ago you didn't. But I saw you once say that on, I believe this was on Facebook. You said when you started writing, you didn't use you use mostly straight characters because because it just felt more, I guess, along the lines with what was average out there, what was being published. Um, what made you start adding your own? Because you're gay, how did you decide to incorporate that into your fiction?
Well, I mean, it was a different world when I was coming up. I mean, Clive Barker had not publicly even come out yet. I didn't see gay people represented in the horror genre, not in any kind of substantive way. Um, and so I felt almost like, well, that you can't do that in horror. And so I was writing, and I was young enough that I was out to myself, but only out to select people at the time. So I just felt like this is how you have to do it. You have to write about straight people. And Clive Barker coming out publicly in the early 90s had a big effect on me. And then he followed it up with his book Sacrament, which was a, a major publication from a major publisher, mainstream horror that had a gay main character and dealt with gay issues. And I even remember when he started putting in his book biography, lives in Los Angeles with his partner. And it might not seem like that big a deal to some people, but like it kind of it made me feel visible in the genre. It made me feel like there was a place at the table for me. And it was around that time, and I remember I was writing an aborted novel at the time, and I had a character and another character, and I just realized, like, if I was really doing what I wanted to with this story, they would be lovers. And so I thought, then why aren't they? I still, I still worried if there was a place in the horror genre for me, but I decided I had to be true to myself and to the kind of stories I wanted to tell. And once I did that, once I decided to go with it, and I made those two characters, even though nothing ever came of that novel, it opened the door I needed to start pursuing characters, because representation and visibility do matter. And I grew up hungering to see myself reflected in the genre I loved, and then I wasn't even doing it. So I really found that freedom to just tell the stories I wanted to tell about the kinds of characters that I wanted to tell.
Yeah, I like how you said that it's important, and it is important because it helps. It feels wrong to say it this way, but it helps normalize it, because there's a lot of people like where I live. I live in a fairly highly conservative area, and you know it's not exactly normalized here, but to continue to do this on television and movies and books, I think is important, because it'll get the idea that a white middle-aged farmer who
Mhm.
uh, who doesn't understand the world that he's in.
Yeah. I definitely think that
I was
entertainment.
also wondering, did you
You can go ahead.
go ahead?
I was just going to say, I do think that art and
You
entertainment
go ahead.
have an impact on just society, and it helps get people comfortable with ideas that maybe they don't, as you were saying, come across. Because I know, growing up in a small southern town, if it wasn't for my local library and the books that I read, who knows where I might be now. But those books opened my eyes to see there's a wider world, there are different kinds of people, there are different ways to live. And so, I keep that in mind. I want my stories to be entertainment, but I also want them to as you said, help normalize this and show that, not every character in a horror book has to be, the straight white hero or, the straight white damsel. Um, that, there can be people of color and there can be um, gay people. And I know when my last book came out, I know someone mentioned, like, it's very rare for them to open a horror book and find a drag queen character in it. And I'm like, there's no reason why not.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. It also opens up so many more avenues, uh, like whatever genre you're working in, but especially horror. Because horror often it discusses the the things that just discussing. You know what I mean? And so not only are you talking about gay characters, but you're talking about the horrors of being gay in rural American life.
Yeah, very true.
And so yeah, that's definitely important. But I'm glad that you're that you're doing this as well. The characters in 2B, as I said, I found all the characters very interesting, especially Berkeley. And I found that there's a point in the novel where he feels as though all friends have abandoned him, uh, because things have gotten scary, and so he feels that they've all just we're not, because things have lost their normalcy around Berkeley. So but in reality, they haven't actually left or abandoned them at all. They're just going through their, while at the same time they are indeed a little freaked out of the supernatural aspects that are happening to Berkeley. Berkeley also has a tendency to push people away. I found this part interesting because there are times in most people's lives where you're going through some issues, and it feels as though you're all alone, that nobody's there for you when you're not. Did you draw things from your real life experiences to come up with this complexity within the story?
Um, Not specifically, but I do have, like I mentioned before, have these ideas about how trauma affects people. I've never been through anything quite so traumatic. I've had my own smaller, traumatic events, in my life, but there is that feeling, and sometimes it's based on reality, sometimes not, that the people around you are really just tired of you and want you to go back to just pretending everything is okay. And, sometimes, if you were mentioning, the people around you have their own stuff going on. And while they might want to be there for you, they also have their own issues to deal with. And I wanted to, you called it complexity, and I do feel that's what it is. It's not like a black and white situation. Um, and I really did, I didn't know how much of the book was going to be about that until I started writing it. But once I got into that, I kind of became fascinated by that and exploring that idea.
Awesome. Uh, Another thing I wanted to ask is kind of a silly question, but the novel is it's quite short. I finished it in like 2 or 3 sittings, and so I was wondering, how did you fit all of these things, all these aspects, into a novel?
Well, I've always believed that a story is going to end up as long as it needs to be, and it probably. I write, novels. I write novellas. I write short stories. The form I feel most comfortable with, in some ways, is the short story. Um, and I've written, I mean, hundreds upon hundreds. And I think I mentioned I have 11 short story collections that have been released. Um, so that gives me a lot of practice with packing a lot of punch into a short form. Um, because, there are some ideas that just need a longer time span. They need a larger canvas. But sometimes I do feel like a good short novel or novella can pack a lot of power into it, even more so because of the brevity of it. And to me, like, I felt like this was just how long this story. I always knew it was going to be about this length, even when I first had the idea. Um, and so I'm a instinctual writer. I write a lot just from the gut. I just start, and I kind of let the rest take care of itself in the process of writing.
Awesome. Now, one thing I didn't advertise in any of my you know putting posters on social media for this was I had planned on doing a live reading so that you could a short of your novel to be. So if you're ready, I think this would be a great place to do that.
Okay, I can do that. Um, I'll just give a little background on where we're coming into the story. Um, Berkeley's been back from the hospital for um, about a day. He's trying to adjust to what's happened to him, and he's come home from work, and his neighbor, who he suspects has a little crush on him, has come over to visit, and they're just having a little conversation here, and I'm just gonna take it from there. Ernie accepted the beer with a smile, and they took a seat at opposite ends of the sofa. Berkeley took a swig of the beer and hated to admit that it tasted amazing, making the bud he usually drank seem like canned piss, which was just how Sasha usually referred to it. He would never say as much to her, however. Silence rolled out between them, filling up the apartment like a noxious gas. Unusual, as Ernie's chatterbox nature usually never left room for even a whiff of silence. Many times he had wished he could make the man shut up, but now that his neighbor seemed uncharacteristically at a loss for words, Berkeley found it disconcerting, more evidence that his life was off kilter like a Twilight Zone episode. So, Berkeley finally said, just to banish the silence, I hear you rode in the ambulance with me to the hospital. I didn't think it would be right to let you go alone. I came to visit you later that first day, but you were out of it, probably didn't know I was there. No, I wasn't aware of very much at first. Kind of disoriented, and it took me a while to even remember what happened. If that bastard hadn't killed himself, I'd have done the job myself, Ernie said, squeezing the bottle so hard Berkeley feared the glass might shatter in the man's fist. The vehemence and venom in Ernie's voice surprised Berkeley. Despite his neighbor's bulldog appearance, he had always exuded a gentle passivity. This degree of anger was a new layer to the man. Berkeley took another pull from his own bottle, enjoying the smooth flavor as it slid down his throat. Well, we don't have to worry about Kevin Nix anymore. I knew the guy was bad news, Ernie said, sliding over and clamping a hand on Berkeley's knee. But I never thought he'd do something like this. When I think about how close I came to losing you, I don't know. Ernie trailed off, and Berkeley looked down at the hand on his knee, wondering if he should take it in his own. No, that might give Ernie the wrong idea, send the wrong message. Berkeley had, of course, known almost since Ernie first moved in next door 3 years ago that he had the hots for Berkeley. He never made any overt moves, part of that gentle passivity, but it was clear that he wanted more from Berkeley than friendship. Ernie was nice enough, but Berkeley felt no sparks with the man. He was older, probably nearing 50, his body squat and solid, not fat exactly, but pushing it. Salt and pepper hair, not receding, but always worn in a severe military-style buzz cut. No, Berkeley simply could not imagine anything romantic with this man. As the seconds ticked by and Ernie didn't move his hand, it began to feel more and more awkward, like a dead rat on Berkeley's knee. He was trying to think of the most tactful way to shake off the hand, when a noise from the closet caught their attention, a cascading sound of several items falling. What was that? Ernie asked. Berkeley stood, finally dislodging the dead rat from his knee, and went to the closet, opening the accordion door. Nothing seemed disturbed, except 3 CD cases were on the floor at his feet. Like most of the modern world under the age of 60, Berkeley streamed all his music. but he hadn't been able to bring himself to get rid of the CDs he'd collected in his youth. He didn't really listen to them anymore, but he kept them tucked away on the upper shelf of his closet, like mementos from his bygone youth. Once he'd found this sentimental and romantic. Now it only seemed stupid and pointless, like saving garbage. Ernie walked to the closet, then bent and picked up the CDs. Let's see what we have here. Soundgarden, Nirvana, NXS. Someone has a 90s fetish. I grew up on the stuff, Ernie said. I'm sorry. I grew up on the stuff, Berkeley said, taking the CDs and placing them back on the top shelf. My older brother listened to this kind of music, so it sort of became the background soundtrack when I was young. A 90s fetish and a suicide fetish. I'm learning a lot about you. Berkeley closed the closet door and turned to his neighbor with a frown. What do you mean, suicide fetish? Those three bands, the lead singers, all killed themselves. Berkeley felt dizzy and thought he might have literally swayed on his feet. He flashed on the books that had fallen from his shelf the night before. Plath, Wolfe, and Hemingway. Carbon monoxide, drowning, gunshot to the head. 3 writers who died from suicide, and now these 3 singers. Add in the shredded book at the store, a book about Dr. Jack Kevorkian, also known as the Suicide Doctor. Puzzle pieces came together, though the overall picture remained unclear. First the books, now the CDs, he said softly to himself. What? Ernie said. Oh, nothing, just that I had some books fall off my bookcase last night. Sounds like the place might be haunted, Ernie said with a laugh. The dizziness intensified, and Berkeley leaned against the wall to steady himself. Oh shit, I don't know what I'm saying, Ernie said, placing a hand on Berkeley's arm. That was a fucked up thing to say just considering. I'm sorry. Berkeley took a few deep breaths and straightened up, a strained smile stretching his lips. It's okay, wasn't you. I'm tired, that's all. Seriously, though, I do apologize for my big mouth. It was only a joke. I know, Berkeley said, thinking, you may have meant it as a joke, but I'm not so sure it is. Just a little bit.
Awesome. Yeah, there was sort of some more things that I mean, those CDs that fell to the ground. That was my decade too. So it was kind of cool seeing seeing all that come up too.
Yeah. Well,
we gotta go ahead.
I was just saying I'm an 80s and 90s kid, so you're going to get a lot of those references from me.
Yeah, me too. Well, we got a funny comment while you were reading that screen here. It's from the Bookish Report. His name is Alex. He's like, "Hey man, have you asked him his 2 favorite colors yet?" So no, I haven't. What are your 2 favorite colors?
I'm partial to purple, and I like blue. So there you go.
Awesome. I like green myself. Green and blue are my favorites. So go, Alex. Now, Alex, I think go to bed and feel informed and comfortable. All right. So speaking of, I guess nobody's mentioned Facebook in a bit, but we did discuss Facebook briefly. I don't use Facebook very much. I go check on my I still get notifications and whatnot, and I use Messenger a lot because that's just so much easier than email, I find. But I usually come across your posts, because I like a lot of your comments, so they always come up first, and so I'm always reading your posts, and you always offer a lot of interesting takes on the like fact that you enjoy writing fan fiction, which I found very interesting, and it got my wheels spinning. Like, you write fan fiction on top of all the other things that you write, and also, what worlds do you enter in your fan fiction journeys?
Well, I have written a lot of Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan fiction. That's probably the number one. I've written some Halloween, the movie Halloween fan fiction. I've done a weird, twisted horror Charlie Brown fan fiction, a weird sexual Snow White fan fiction, and I'm trying to think of other ones that I've done, but and there are other worlds I want. Like I haven't done it yet, but like I have an idea for like a Nightmare on Elm Street fan fiction. But I get very just the idea of stories excites me, and sometimes if I'm there's a fictional world that I love, I get ideas for that world, and I'm like, why not just write them for fun? But even though I'm writing them for fun, I take them seriously. I have done research for fan fiction stories before because I want it to be as good as it can, and I put them up on there's a fanfiction.net, fanfiction.net, I think it is, where I put them up, but and periodically I share them. But yeah, because writing to me is just so much fun. Like just because it's somebody else's world, if I get an idea for that world, I want to explore it just to make myself happy.
Of course. It sounds like something that probably a lot of writers do. I mean, I've never done it, but I can see, especially the more prolific writers, doing that. Have you ever talked to other writers about doing this, and have you found that you're not alone? That a lot of people do this?
I know some other writers that do it. I also know some other writers who think it's a waste of time, and that those of us who do it are just throwing away our talent. But I don't really care about that sort of thing because again, I'm just doing what I do, and what I do is having fun. And so yeah, I mean, it's kind
Mhm.
of a polarizing issue, but like I know some people who do it. I know some people who think that it's just a horrible thing. So I'm on the camp of if it makes you happy, do it. It's not hurting anybody.
That's me too. That's like my philosophy of life. As long as hurting anyone, live. Like I, there's so many like the topic of pantsers versus people who plot their
Yeah.
stories. The people who write by the seat of their pants, man, it's almost like a religion for them, and they'll come at you if you suggest plotting.
Well, I am a pantser, but I'm also very much of the opinion that whatever works for you is what works. What works for me
Yeah,
isn't going to work for somebody else.
exactly. Yeah,
I don't get those people on either
but
side that think if I do it this way, then everybody should do it this way.
yeah, exactly. As long as it's getting done and you're having fun, that's the most important part, I think. Getting back to the fan fiction, though, I was wondering if you ever see yourself writing an extended media for television or movies, like you see with shows like Supernatural or franchises like Friday the 13th, because they all have like novelizations and extended novels within those worlds.
I wouldn't. I mean, nobody's ever asked me, but I would not be adverse to such a thing because, like I said, I get these ideas that excite me set in other worlds, and if I'm really a fan, like I am really a Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan. I know those characters probably almost as well as the people who created them. So, and I've read some of those Buffy novels they used to do. Some of them are good, and some of them I read them and I think they don't really know those characters. that's not that's not the voice of that
Yeah.
character, and I feel like I would love to do. They don't really do those anymore because the show's been off the air for so long. But I would love to get into these fictional worlds that I'm a fan of, and because even in there you can have your own creativity and your own originality while being true to the world that's been created. I think so. Yeah, if anybody wants me to do one, just shoot me a message. I'm free.
So I can do it. I can do it. And Mark, he could definitely do it for sure. Are there any other universes that you would like to write in, like other than Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is a very great show, by the way. I love that show too.
I just do. Like I said, I have an idea for a Nightmare on Elm Street one I want to try sometime, because I grew up in the 80s, so the big three horror movies, or the big three horror franchises, were Nightmare, Friday the 13th, and Halloween. I've done some Halloween fan fiction, but the Nightmare on Elm Street series is the one that probably captured my imagination the most. Good, good, good. I like that. That's a good shirt. Um, and and I think that because of the dream aspects and almost anything was possible, that one really captured my imagination. So I'd probably like to do some of that. But like I even like in my head, I used to write sequels to those movies. Um, and so I have like these weird ideas of like how I have a Friday the 13th like sequel in my head. But so yeah, those early horror movies from the 80s that I grew up on, I have a deep love for, so I wouldn't mind, delving into those.
Awesome. I wrote another silly question here because some writers that I like have mentioned this actually. So maybe it's not so silly, but with the way you talk about writing and how much fun you have writing, I'm kind of thinking the answer to this question is going to be in the negative, that you don't feel this way. But I said that you write so much. Do you ever feel or fear that the well will dry up and you'll be done?
I could not imagine it. I love it so much, and I never have a lack of ideas. Like I have more ideas than I will probably ever get to in my life, and obviously some of them take 20 years for me to even get around to. So, but yeah, like that's not saying there are not days that are better than others. There are not days where I struggle, that I feel like I'm not getting it right. But for the most part, I'm excited every morning to get up and come into the office and start writing, um, because it's so much fun for me. I can't wait and because the way I write, the story sort of develops. I might think I know where it's going, but sometimes it surprises me and goes somewhere different. So I'm excited to get in here and see what's going to happen next. So I can't imagine there will ever come a time where that excitement isn't carrying me through.
Do you ever you said that you never lack for ideas. Does it ever bother you? Like, do you ever have so many ideas that you feel overwhelmed?
Um, I mean, there are some times when I'm getting near the end of a project where it's like, which one of these am I going to do? And I mean, sometimes there's one particular idea that's screaming at me louder than the others, but then sometimes there's not. So I'm not sure, and sometimes what I do is I start on one idea and I'm like, not really feeling it yet. Maybe the time hasn't come. I start on another one. Sometimes I might go through three or four before I hit on the one where I'm like, this is it. And then sometimes, because I do love short stories, I might finish a novel and decide for the next 6 months I'm doing nothing but writing short stories, because I have an endless supply of short story ideas too. That I'm usually working on a few, even when I'm working on longer projects. But sometimes I like to take a big chunk of time and do nothing but short stories.
Yes. Um, One reason why I call you prolific is because of your short story writing. I've talked to you before about this on the Darkness Dwells podcast. You have quite a few collections out, and I know that you love to write stories at certain times of the year, like Halloween stories. Every October, you write few 2 or 3 Halloween stories, and I think that's awesome because I love the short story form myself. So how do you split that up? How do you say, okay, I'm gonna work on this novel, or oh my god, I got to write these short stories, and here I go. How do you split that up?
Well, if I'm working on a novel, I try to make it my main focus. But let's say I get a short story idea that's just clamoring to be written. I'm like, okay, I'm going to take 2 days off of the novel. I'm going to write the story. Or maybe there are a couple of like monthly flash fiction challenges I always like to enter. So when they put out the new theme for that month, I'm like, okay, I'm going to take a day off of the novel and write this story. But I try not to do that too much. I will also do it if I get to a part of the novel where I'm a little stuck, where the gears just aren't turning and I'm trying to figure my way out. It's good to take a break and write a short story, because it gives you a mental break from that, but it also gives you a sense of accomplishment because you can finish it quickly, and that kind of buoys you, and you can go back to the novel a little refreshed. And then, like I said, sometimes I have so many short story ideas. I'm like, okay, so after this novel, nothing but short stories for 6 months. I'm not even thinking about longer projects yet.
Awesome. So, 2B, your new novel, it comes out on February the 13th of this year, and that is 1 week from now. I noticed earlier today that the pre-order is up for the Kindle version on Amazon. I was wondering if you know whether or not there's going to be a print version or not.
There will be a paperback version. He only put the Kindle up for the pre-order, but once it's out, there will be a paperback version that follows. And I'm very excited. I'm working with Valhalla Books, which is a relatively new publisher, and they've done a great anthology called The Devil's Due, and then this is their first solo author book. So I was really honored he asked me, but yeah, he's going to do a digital and a paperback version.
That is a big honor, and congratulations on this, plus all your other publications as well. But I mean, you're always coming out with new things too. So I was wondering, what else do you have coming out this year? I'm certain there's got to be a couple more things.
Well, later this year, we don't have a date yet, but it's probably going to be late spring or into the summer. Crystal Lake Publishing is doing releasing a suspense novel I wrote called Before He Wakes, which I'm very excited about. It's very much a Mark Gunnells story, but it's also it's much more plot driven and than some of my other works. This is one that I actually did outline a little bit, just because I needed to make sure I knew how. It's what I call an obstacle novel, where the characters have to overcome a series of obstacles. So I needed to know that I knew how they were going to get out of all of them. But that's going to come out later this year. And then next year, they'll be publishing a novella I wrote called When It Rains, which I wrote during the period I was furloughed from work last spring. And that's going to come out sometime next year. And I don't have any definite plans, but I definitely want to get to another short story collection at some point. Like you mentioned, I do write Halloween stories every October, so I have 2 collections that are specifically nothing but Halloween stories, and I have enough for another one.
Awesome.
Don't have a publisher for it yet, but I'll have enough.
One of my favorite collections of Halloween stories ever is written by you, sir, and it's this one right here.
Thank you.
It's Halloween House of Horrors. Go ahead.
I remember you gave me a lovely review for that, and it meant a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I read this 1 year. I forget when. It was a couple of years ago, a few years ago, and it just, wow, like all the stories in here. Like the one thing about Mark Allan Gunnells, the Mark Allan Gunnells reader will be familiar with one of his collections, because he always has 2 types of story in his collections, I found anyway. I'm sure there's more, but what I tend to gravitate towards are the 2 stories of where one story will be just brutal and violent and god awful, terrible things happening everywhere, and then you'll follow it up with like the most heartwarming thing that makes you want to cry. When you're putting a collection together, do you organize the stories in a sense for to sort of like grab at the reader's emotions like that?
Um, I do intentionally put a diverse mix of stories in there because I have a diverse I have diverse interests, and I write some very graphic horror stories. I write some more atmospheric horror stories. I write some stories that are not horror at all, just dramatic or silly, and I like my collections to reflect that. I like because as a reader, when I read a collection, I think of it as like a smorgasbord, and I feel like I can see a lot of what the writer can do, not just like they in a novel like they did this one thing, but in a collection they might do a lot of different things, and I like to do that. And sometimes in a weird way, I think it's fun to follow up a really gut wrenching, violent story with something that's more gentle, um, because I feel like in some ways that takes the reader off guard and intrigues them maybe a little bit because then they truly never know exactly what's coming next.
I always find it's a really great mix in your collections because of that sort of juxtaposition between the two different styles. It's very much it's like getting punched in the gut uh, and then being told it's okay, it's okay.
Yeah. I mean,
Here's some chocolate.
in Halloween House of Horrors, there's even a children's story thrown in there.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I forgot about that, but you're right. I also have this. You sent this to me because you ran a contest on Facebook and I answered and I actually won. I don't know if you remember sending me this, but you signed this one.
Yeah.
To Jason, hope you enjoy the tales herein. So thank you for that.
You're
And
welcome.
all right, so I think that's about it. Before we go, I was wondering, where would you direct readers to get updates from you about your work that's coming out? Where's the best place for them to find you online?
Um, I'm very active on Facebook, Mark Allan Gunnells. I've recently gotten more active on Twitter at Mark A. Gunnells. I'm on Instagram as Make Reading Cool Again, but literally all I do is post pictures of books I'm reading. Um, and I do have a blog, markgunnells.livejournal.com, which I do update. Um, that was not always the case in the past, but I've been pretty good about it lately. And so yeah, those places, but Facebook and Twitter are probably the two places that have the most information about what I have coming up.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. It's as always, it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me on.
And thanks to everyone who showed up. And yeah, so that's it. If you want to stick around just for a minute, the broadcast, and we'll say our pleasantries and all that. And thanks again, everyone.
Bye bye.